All right, now I scano everybody. My name's Hayden Haynes, the director of the Inosa Cultural Center. Happy to uh, have this time with John Daigle, he's a member of the Penobscot Nation, talking about black ash and the emerald ash borer and the problems that is facing in a lot of contexts, but in many ways the makers in Indian country. So we're glad that he's here to share his, over a decade's worth of intense work specifically on this field, and then of course his other work as well. So thank you everybody for being here. And without any more, I would like to turn it over to John.
Well, thank you, Hayden, and it's a honor to present to you and have this information available for you if you have the ability to see this presentation at a later date. And also, if there's any further interest or questions that you might have after viewing the presentation that I'm giving, please do not hesitate to reach out to me. And Hayden or Hannah, I'm sure they'll have like an email address or something that means if you want to get in touch with me. But tonight, yeah, again, it's great to talk with you because this is such an important issue here in this region of the country and our state, and in the Wabanaki. And so it really focuses around this special tree, the brown ash tree, that's used for basket making and part of so much of our life here. And hopefully you'll see the importance with a video that I'm going to show you in just a few minutes, but then also importantly kind of strategies that are taking place right now to try to keep this tree species as part of our as part of our forest. And I just wanted to oops, let's see. Oh, just share this next slide because it's a special slide. It's my grandparents who are basket makers. I don't know if you can make out this little 1983 on my grandmother's shirt there, but it was that long ago when I was first starting college, and I used to help my grandparents make baskets. And I realized it was special then, but I don't know, as a student, I just wanted to start taking pictures and do things to kind of record what I was seeing. And I just enjoyed being with them. And I spent a lot of time with them in the out of doors doing lots of outdoor activities that really influenced my career and where I am today. But I also just think it's so ironic that that they shared that gift of the basket making and the importance, and now I'm helping to try to address this concern with the emerald ash borer. it's just kind of freaky in some ways, when I think about it. And but at the same time, I'm glad I'm present to be able to try to help out in this way because I know it's so important. I learned so much from them, but with the work that I've been doing over the past decade, I've just learned so much from other elders and people who are doing efforts to try to address this concern. And one of the elders who I've been working with since the beginning, and I'll come back to Richard Syllaboy at the end of my presentation, but this is a 7-minute presentation that kind of shows, I think, in a good way, some of the cultural importance of this tree. So I'm going to probably need to stop the share and bring up the screen, so bear with me here.
Paling geduldig naman nalagay ko. Wala rin geduldig lang. our creation story for the Wabanaki people. That's the 4 tribes. It's not Adam and Eve. The creator put Galuskab on the earth, and the earth was barren. And Galuskab created, the trees and the grass, and also created the animals. And then he realized that he needed something to take care of the animals and take care of Mother Earth. He took his bow and arrow and he shot it into a brown ash tree, splitting the brown ash tree open. And out came the natives dancing and singing. Our relationship with the forest, it's just that, it's always been very sacred to us. And a lot of our medicines are in the trees and in the ground and the woods. And of course, the brown ash tree is very sacred to us. Bear tracks. This here brown ash. These are the leaves on the brown ash. You notice the leaf is right on this main stem. If you see a leaf right on the stem, you know that's brown ash. If it's white ash, it'll have a little twig between the main stem and the leaf. The biggest threat to the brown ash right now is the emerald ash borer that came into the country back in the mid-90s. They didn't identify it until 2002. Came in on the pallets. They didn't process the pallets before they put it on the ship. And when they brought it into the Great Lakes area in Michigan, they dropped off the pallets along with the emerald ash borer, the larvae, and it just continued to spread. It spread from Michigan right to southern Maine, and also it come across Quebec. It's now into northern Maine. We have about 6 towns quarantined up there, northern Maine, and hopefully they can slow it down. I know they can't stop it. They haven't stopped it yet. Each year it'll multiply that much more and it'll spread that much faster. Black ash is the only tree that you can pound and separates the year's growth. Now, year's growth is this year's inner bark will be next year's splint. And depending on the nutrition that the tree gets will depend on the thickness of that next year's splint. And when you pound that, it breaks the fibers between the year's growth, and each splint will separate. And that's what we use to make our baskets out of it. Basket making is the oldest art in the Northeast. And before we started using brown ash, we was using birch bark. Mother raised 8 of us. There was 7 boys and 1 girl. And she did stoop labor, raking blueberries and picking potatoes. She'd cut potato seed in the spring. Once in a while, she'd be out in the field harvesting broccoli or cauliflower. Anytime she wasn't working stoop labor, she would be making baskets. When I was young, the boys all lived at home and they would work for the local farmers. But at night when they come home, they would help mother make baskets. living in town, you don't see the stars, you don't get to enjoy the moon. And I come out here and it was just pitch dark at night. And I'd come out and stand in the cold and watch the stars, Milky Way. That's my favorite place here in the evenings, is sitting out here and watching the stars. You can see the flying stars. Working with the brown ash, it's very spiritual. When I'm working on a basket, I'm using something that's very sacred to all the Wabanaki people. If the climate change or the emerald ash borer was to totally wipe out the brown ash, it would be very devastating for the Wabanaki people of the Northeast. They're saying 50 years from now, there'll be no ash in this area because everything's just moving north. We're collecting seeds and we're gonna store them and preserve them, and hopefully at some point in time we can be able to replant. Name, date, and my tribe. Mi'kmaq. That's the native pronunciation of the word Micmac. Micmac is the European version. So now it's done.
There, I just wanted to share that short video. But someone who I've been working with for many, many years, and someone who's very dedicated. Individual, he's the vice chief for Mi'kmaq, and just has been so influential in the community and with other tribal communities here in Maine and elsewhere. And I'll talk a little bit more about his engagement a little later as we go through the presentation. But hopefully you get a sense of the cultural significance of the black ash. But again, Richard probably didn't have time to go into this. Again, he talked about the medicinal plants that tend to grow around the black ash tree. But there's something special about areas where black ash grows. It just looks different from other places in the forest. And it does really kind of support a unique habitat for a lot of other species. So there's a relationship to other species that's really present that you can see visually if you're in a black ash stand. And again, just the way that the black ash and other ash species, they are kind of unique tree species compared to other trees, in the sense of just with their leaves tending to come out a little later in the spring, where sunlight gets down to the forest floor, stays longer during the spring, where it supports growth of that forest floor. The leaves have a different chemical composition, where they tend to drop off a little earlier in the fall and decompose much, much more quicker than oak, maple leaves, and adds that nutrient to the soils. It just creates this unique environment where it's tied to a lot of other insects and birds and other things. So the ecological significance is really something that we kind of also need to be thinking about with ash trees, that hopefully more research can show also with that. And of course, the economic significance. I know my grandparents relied on selling those baskets to supplement the income. It was a big part of the puzzle, and pulling pieces together to get through the year. Their basket, the extra bedroom in their house, literally was half full of baskets. They made so many baskets that they would sell during the summer. So that income was really important. But also other ash species like white have economic value. the shade value of trees, particularly in cities where a lot of ash trees have been planted. You can see a picture there in the center. This is the mall of the University of Maine, where it's lined with green ash. So it's a tree that's also used ornamentally in our cities and streets and campuses and so forth. So there's lots of significance to ash trees. And this is one of my colleagues, Darren Ranko. He's the director of the Wabanaki Center here at the University of Maine. He's a professor in anthropology, colleague that I work closely with for lots of different projects. But again, we both started out with this together, and he kind of coined the term of this emerald ash borer being a wicked problem. And it really is, when you think about the devastation that it causes. It's going to be, one of the most impactful things happening to our forest when it's said and done. I think it's very comparable to other invasives, and that are high impact. This is like a top 5 invasive where it really has broad level impacts, which is going to require a lot of new thinking and collaboration as we kind of think about this invasive that is so destructive. And when we first started doing this work a decade or so ago, we really kind of needed to kind of think outside the box in terms of thinking about, well, how can we respond? How can we adapt to this emerald ash borer? And at this point in time, it was really focused, in Michigan, maybe Ohio, but we already started thinking through, what information do we need? Who could be helping us in terms of addressing the emerald ash borer and protecting our ash trees? So early on, in terms of just gathering more information about this emerald ash borer, because so little was known about it, we reached out to researchers, we reached out to natural resource agencies to learn more about the emerald ash borer and helping us plan. And again, a lot of the tribal involvement really, I think, helped drive some of the actions here in our state. Partly because, again, it was the ash harvesters kind of informing our ash harvesters here in our state, where we really kind of started bringing in experts, I guess you would say, in terms of what they knew at that point in time about the emerald ash borer and what we might want to be considering doing. And so one of the first things that we did was try to ban the importation of firewood. We have a lot of tourists here that come to our state. So an emergency order was created where I went down to Augusta, testified, and others testified. And Maine was one of the first states in the country to kind of create this law, emergency order, to ban firewood from out of state coming into our state to try to protect the ash that we had in our state. And other states started to do that too soon after. But we tried to put into place some steps and actions to try to help plan. And down below is one of the few people that had done actual work studying black ash trees, who was an indigenous scholar from New York, who studied at the University of Minnesota. And it was one of the few dissertations that existed in terms of looking at the ecology of the brown ash tree and site characteristics where ash trees, good quality ash trees would grow for baskets and so forth. So he kind of documented some of those things, and we had him come out to Maine and share his knowledge. And so that it really kind of started this kind of collaboration, working with state, federal agencies, and others who are interested, that I think is key, and that I'll be talking about as we go through this presentation. And like I had mentioned early on, collaborations were started with some of the tribal communities in Michigan. We brought our basket harvesters out to that location where they could start to see the devastation that was occurring in Michigan, to see what it looked like. Again, thinking through, well, who is going to be in the woods noticing where this might be? Obviously, it would be some of the harvesters who are collecting ash. And And some of the research facilities that started in Michigan, we had some of our harvesters go. There were some people who do research on ash trees and emerald ash borer. They had never seen ash being utilized for making baskets. And so there were some discussions there and kind of collaborations that were started in Michigan. That's Kelly Church on the bottom of the orange hat, who was a real key figure and still today in terms of communications and sharing information. Michigan and us and others interested in protecting ash. Les Benedict, another key figure who was involved early on. And again, his involvement in black ash preservation goes beyond even when emerald ash borer entered into the United States, where he was trying to propagate black ash, bringing back black ash into the community for basket making. There's really such a beautiful, rich history of basket making in New York, northern New York. And again, kind of protect and revitalize basket making was part of his work that really contributed to our knowledge and what we're doing now in terms of his efforts, in terms of propagating black ash with seed that's being collected. And Les was just here a few weeks ago with our seed collection efforts and training, and he's been a strong partner from the very beginning. So meetings in New York and having folks from Michigan and New York come to Maine, we've had this collaborative relationship for over a decade. We've also had some meetings, again, kind of bringing the latest science around black ash, the responses of black ash when EAB comes into that area where black ash is growing. We had a colloquium here at the University of Maine. Out of that, we published a paper that kind of brought in perspectives both from the scientific community, but also traditional harvesters. This is going out. This is Butch Jacobs and basketry harvester, maker, and other harvesters that were part of this effort and colloquium event, kind of sharing information. And again, work with the U.S. Forest Service in terms of, again, just trying to understand the biology of the emerald ash borer and the potential impacts it might be having and will be having in our state, and something that I know that you're experiencing right now in New York. But again, in terms of looking at, when EAB is first detected in the densities of EAB, we already are kind of understanding the dynamics. And unfortunately, I think you might be on the tip end of EAB being in around your area for now about 10 years. So you're at kind of at the peak where we're having EAB densities being very high. And then after it's kind of impacted that tree, it also has the association of that ash mortality. And so you can see, it's kind of taking advantage of those ash trees that are growing, eating the phloem in that tree and kind of choking it. And after that ash tree population drops, then the EAB populations drop, and you can kind of see that. So there's a kind of a cusp, crest, and then post crest or post EAB invasion wave that I think is really important. And so a lot of the strategies that we're going to go into in the next few minutes is really focused mostly on strategies that are targeted towards kind of post EAB invasion, which I think will have some real important implications to the ash that's growing in your area. One of the other things that research has shown, and I also think kind of gives some weight to the urgency of taking some actions while you can, is what we know in terms of how susceptible ash is to EAB. And unfortunately, the black ash, of all the ash species, there's 18 or so species in the United States. Black ash is the most susceptible to EAB. And it takes the least amount of EAB on the tree to kill it. So it's just one of those, again, relationships that we're starting to see, again, where with some of these strategies, it just shows the urgency if we want to take advantage of some things while we still can, such as seed collection. We've got to really focus particularly on black ash because of the susceptibility and the mortality, the higher rates of mortality in black ash as compared to some of the other ash species. These are the things that we're kind of learning that's informing us in terms of prioritizing our efforts. And again, with monitoring the EAB infestations, and especially with black ash, the mortality rates are like 98%. It's very, very high. So again, but I think what's also important is that in some cases, even though there's high mortality among all ash species, and particularly black ash, there are some ash trees that do show some evidence of some resistance, some genetic difference between some tree species within the species that shows some ability to resist and protect itself from the EAB. So there's some variation in terms of the ability of ash trees to protect itself. And that's a focus of research that's also being done in terms of trying to study that dynamic, which is really important. And so I just wanted to also acknowledge another colloquial meeting that was held in Vermont. Many of the same people that were here in Maine, but also adding new people and more research related to efforts around studying the emerald ash borer, potential management strategies we would want to consider, given the time that's elapsed and seeing the kind of the biology dynamics and what's happening to ash trees. Again, what's important about this meeting in Vermont was kind of the continuation of work to be focused on black ash, because early on when EAB was first detected in Michigan, in the Midwest, all the activity focused around white, which is the most commercially important species in terms of industry, and also green, which is the most frequently planted ash tree in cities. So it kind of made sense on one level that a lot of the research would focus on those things, maybe for those reasons, but black ash was kind of left out of the the research and monitoring and all these other kind of dynamics. And so it really has only been the past 7-8 years with this work. And I think the emphasis that we kind of people coming together, wanting to know more, wanting to take action around black ash, that more research now is being directed towards black ash and trying to gain ground on other things. We've certainly learned from the work that's been done on white and green, but we also need to kind of develop that research on black ash because of its uniqueness. And so out of that work, again, looking at some potential strategies, there's been 10 recommendations, kind of thinking about best management practices in terms of thinking about managing forests and maybe what you can do as a forest landowner. Some work from these individuals kind of created the 10 recommendations for managing ash. And I'll talk briefly about that as we go along. But again, these were things that were kind of being developed to help take action and being more proactive in terms of thinking about the emerald ash borer, because there was a point in time not too long ago, and it's still persistent with a lot of folks today, is that a lot of folks thought it's a lost cause. What are we going to plant in replace of ash to take its place? And so a lot of our effort, again, with some of the research that's showing some promise, we're saying, hey, wait, don't give up, still try to protect this species, because what we do now can make a difference later on. If we take no action, there's certainly going to be a higher chance that it's not going to be part of our forest or in certain regions of our country. So some of these 10 recommendations for managing ash kind of helps direct that, and we're going to kind of continue to go in that direction. So I just wanted to show briefly, kind of actions that kind of have been resulting. And again, just a very quick overview with, at least in our region, right? We had been able to keep the emerald ash borer out of our state for many, many years. And and it was in New Hampshire for quite a few years. And again, I think through the quarantines and other efforts, we were able to kind of slow that rate to get into our state. But in 2016, there was the New Hampshire detection in multiple places. It was 2018 where we started to have that filter into that southern portion of our state. And then we also had a detection in northern Maine from Canada that, again, it wasn't, in that case, it wasn't like firewood transportation. It was a natural population in Canada that came over the river into our state. So it wasn't kind of human assisted. It was just kind of flew over into our state. And that's where we had this action in 2018, where we had official detections of the Emerald Ash Borer in our state. And again, I'm kind of showing you, just a few slides just to show, again, over time, it is spreading and we're expecting it to spread. But again, what's a little bit different here in Maine, again, I think because of the work that we're doing and the importance that we're showing related to ash, we've had a lot of cooperation with the Maine Forest Service, and supporting the continuation of quarantines and the movement of areas from wood that are infested. So there was the federal deregulation of movement of trees from state to state, but Maine has kept its quarantine and regulation of movement. And again, part of that is to slow the rate of spread of the Emerald Ash Borer. And so related to that is careful monitoring that needs to take place to see where we have infestations, have our boundaries and quarantines. We know it's going to grow, but as part of that, we have extensive monitoring that's going on, looking for the Emerald Ash Borer to see if we do need to expand that quarantine zone. We do that through these traps. Some of you may have seen these purple traps and other kind of traps that are used to detect EAB. And so we have a network of landowners and efforts done by the state for monitoring Emerald Ash Borer to detect if we need to change the quarantines in our state. And the whole idea behind this is to slow the rate of spread of the Emerald Ash Borer, because in our state, we still have the majority of our ash trees alive. And so the more time we can buy, the more research that can be done and efforts for collecting seed that we feel is really important. So this kind of coordinated activity is something that is still really, really important that takes place, with the idea of this, hoping to slow the rate of spread of the Emerald Ash Borer. So I wanted to talk, about some of the strategies, and I guess I put this puzzle piece in here because I think there's a lot of puzzle pieces that need to kind of come together and work together if we really want to try to make this to be a successful endeavor. It's something for us to consider. We're still working within our communities here, thinking through some of our strategies and looking at the pros and cons associated with these strategies. But the combination of strategies, or an integrated approach, seems the best way forward for us to be successful. So I kind of wanted to talk through these integrated approaches to our efforts to ash preservation. And one of the first steps is inventory and monitoring, knowing where your ash trees are growing and monitoring where you have EAB and where you're EAB free. This is one of those first initial steps that's really, really important. And I'm showing a picture of one of my grad students, Tyler Everett. He's Mi'kmaq. His family were basket makers too. And as part of his master's project, he created an ash inventory field manual. And again, it goes beyond just inventorying where your ash trees are growing. It's collecting other information associated with those ash stands that you could use in terms of thinking through silviculture or how you might manage your forest. Seed collection effort, biological controls, which I'll show you in a few minutes, and also including insecticide treatments that you might want to consider in protecting certain ash trees in your areas. But all contingent on this is knowing where your ash tree is, where your ash trees are growing, particularly those trees that are basket quality trees and things that will help you to make informed decisions. And so his master's work focused on development of that ash tree inventory manual, but now he's working on his PhD looking at silvicultural treatments and preparation of EAB that makes it more or less vulnerable to EAB and more ready to set up after the EAB population has been through that area and you're trying to regrow ash trees from your seed stock. So as part of the trainings we've done, we've done a lot with the tribal forestry programs here in our state, but also state and other landowners who are interested in becoming more familiar with their ash trees that are growing in their woodlots or lands that are managed. And again, the idea of just bringing this awareness to folks, because in a lot of cases, folks are not aware of brown ash growing on their property in wetland areas. It's often a tree that's not part of inventories that have been traditionally done in forest management plans because they tend to be in those wet areas where harvesting would not take place. So again, in a lot of cases, it's really kind of unknown where we have these pockets of brown ash, which is really important. And so this is trying to bring that awareness about, and including foresters in developing management plans and maybe taking extra steps instead of walking past that brown ash, which I don't think has a lot of value, marking it, and because it does have value. The other part of this in terms of the inventory and monitoring is the seed collection and banking. Because we know now that we have a limited time for collecting seed. Once EAB has come through and you have nearly all of your ash trees killed by the emerald ash borer, if no actions are taken, you're not going to have seed collection. Your trees are going to die, and you're going to lose that ability to collect that seed. And unfortunately, in some cases, where no actions have been taking place, and we've got enough time here where you have some of the trees that were in the soil and growing back up again, they were attacked by the emerald ash borer again before they could get to the stage of producing seed. So there's really a limited amount of time for collecting seed for areas that are already impacted. So if you have live trees where you have seed, collect it when you can. And that's what we're doing right now with our efforts here in the Northeast, is putting a heavy emphasis on collecting seed. And again, Les Benedict and his colleague were so critical with the work that they had done with their propagation and seed collection work, even again before the emerald ash borer. It really helped inform us in terms of our seed collection efforts, how to collect seed, take care of seed, where to send seed. All of those things had really already been kind of thought out by some of the actions that Les was doing early on that helped us and that continue to help us today. And again, we've had some recent trainings where we've been collecting seed this year. And what's so important too is, again, just learning, because again, based on some of the work that Les had done early on, it also just showed, boy, if you've got seed, take advantage of it now, because another unique thing about black ash is it doesn't produce seed every year. It produces seed probably every 5 to 7 years. So again, if you have the opportunity to collect seed, have your steps all set up, what you're going to do with it, take care of it, because again, last year we had a very good seed production year, but this year we had a very limited seed production year. We were able to collect some seed this year, but we've got to be prepared when it's available to collect it, because of just the uniqueness. Green ash produces seed every year. White ash, so again, it varies depending upon the ash trees. So the seed collection and seed banking, thinking through that both for short-term banking and the seed collection that you might be collecting for planting near term is something that would all be thought out of in terms of thinking about silvicultural practices on the forest. You're going to have a seed bank that's going to be present where you have trees that have been killed by the emerald ash borer, but you might need to manage that forest as release sites, because at least here in the Northeast, there's other tree species that could easily come in and outcompete ash. So in some cases, we're thinking of strategies to try to make it favorable conditions for ash, for at least for it to be a little more competitive, given the circumstances. And also the ability to possibly propagate seed for replanting. I don't know in your area if you have a lot of invasives on your forest floor, but we do here in our state. And again, thinking through, well, if we propagate our seedlings, maybe we propagate them, grow them to a height where we replant them, we're going above the invasive plants so that they can be successful in growing up to be more mature. So we're kind of thinking through those strategies and what we're going to do. But again, this is kind of that whole integrated nature of, I think, of things that we're going to need to think through. So this is part of Tyler's work right now as part of his PhD study in terms of looking at kind of the conditions of the forest pre-EAB invasion, thinking through what things need to be measured and documented to encourage seedling growth, and kind of that aftermath forest too of when EAB has gone through that area, so that you've got more trees kind of coming in to take care of the take the place of the parent trees that have died. Another couple strategies that need careful consideration and community input is the potential of using chemical controls. And again, it was a very thoughtful process that had to happen in Akwesasne, where there was EAB infestations, where they were doing protection efforts, propagating ash, and in some cases, you know, and I have thought of this carefully, but again, need to get community input. But I think it makes sense in some selected instances to consider strongly insecticide treatment, where you might have it targeted towards certain ash trees so that you have you protect those ash trees so that you have some live ash trees that can still produce seed. It protects itself from the EAB so that you have a live seed source besides your seed banking that might take place, and you're able to retain that ash on that landscape. Again, you could not treat all of your ash trees, but in this instances, we're looking at ways where we might think of treating some trees chemically. They've shown to be very effective, very nuanced in that it really targets EAB and not other things. A lot of research has been done around this. Still need to monitor it, of course, but again, it's one of those other things that we have in our toolbox that we could integrate into some of our strategies that I think could help us be successful in the long term, and hopefully something that you would not need to do long term after an aftermath forest where you have fewer EAB and you have more resistant ash trees. The idea is that you would not need this in the future, hopefully. And so there's different treatments, but the most effective treatment is it's a chemical treatment that you inject into the tree. It's not sprayed. You can get spray protection, but this is in the tree. It's in there to protect the emerald ash borer from going into that tree. If it eats the leaves, it will kill that EAB. It's not inexpensive. There's some cost to protecting those trees, and it varies by the size of your ash tree and how much chemical treatment it will require to protect itself. But again, it has mostly been applied in urban settings where you might have trees that are of special importance or could become hazard trees. So you want to keep those trees alive. the combination of the chemical approach with other kind of aspects have really protected ash trees in those urban settings. And now we're just experimenting in places where we might consider this in a forested setting. The other integrated approach are native and non-native biological controls. And again, this is something that was, again, implemented because it was apparent that it couldn't be eradicated naturally, because early efforts were done in Michigan and Maryland and other places where EAB was first detected, where we've had success with some invasives like the Asian longhorn beetle. We've been able to eradicate it once it's become introduced into certain areas. We have not been able to do that with EAB. And so the strategy was to consider a biological control, something that could be something that would target that emerald ash borer specifically, and only the emerald ash borer. And so biological releases have been done throughout areas that have had infestations with the emerald ash borer. Again, research is being done in terms of monitoring the impacts of the biological control and its effectiveness in addressing, impacting the emerald ash borer in terms of its population densities and so forth. And is it something that could potentially work in terms of controlling the emerald ash borer? It's widely assumed that we will never get rid of the emerald ash borer in places where it's gone through and pretty much killed the EAB, and when killed the ash trees and ash trees regrow, it comes back and attacks those ash trees. So you need to have a counterbalance, and the counterbalance is a predator that historically has been associated with the emerald ash borer. So you can see the areas in red where you can see a lot of parasitoid releases, and you can see New York has had quite a few releases compared to other states. And it's actually where we have some of the more informative research that's been done monitoring the effects of the releases, where they've actually been able to document the impact that the parasitoid is having on EAB density levels. They're actually able to start to see where these parasitoids are actually following where EAB is going and seeking out new ash trees and to attack. They follow them, and so we're thinking that once these become established, hopefully they'll kind of be part of the mix in terms of controlling those EAB population levels. And what's exciting, and I think really something to consider, at least in your area, is that there have been documented cases where there have been places where EAB has impacted an ash forest stand, killing most of the ash trees, and where you have ash trees regrowing, they've released some of the parasitoids with where the EAB is, and that's still in that forest stand, and they've actually been able to protect those ash trees and have those ash trees continue to grow. And they're at a rate that is much different from control sites where there's no parasitoids released. So they seem to be helping protect the ash trees in those areas. And New York is one of the places where a lot of these studies are kind of being conducted in terms of looking at those effects. Because I think like a lot of these strategies, the efficacy of those strategies you need time to kind of tell, is it working? How might we change it, right? And and in some ways you guys are on the front lines in terms of testing these things that so many other folks can learn from, including us here in our state, which informs us in terms of making decisions. So this is just an example. There's a lot of native biocontrols. We have native wasps that feed on EAB. We have woodpecker. The woodpecker predation of EAB is extremely important here in our state. But also we're thinking of these non-native biocontrols, because the native biocontrols are not going to be enough. It hasn't shown to be enough in other areas, and the parasitoids seem to be balancing out a little bit more. in some cases. So again, it's sometimes a hard sell bringing in an invasive to fight another invasive, but again, it's one of those things where we'll see if it works. And again, Akwesasne and some of their strategies, they are one of the first tribal nations, I think, in the country that truly has this integrated approach in terms of protecting their ash trees. That's going to help inform us in our strategies where it hasn't been impacted yet. So we'll see how these things kind of work together in protecting ash trees. And again, New York you guys are right on the cutting edge, I think, of a lot of informative research and ideas. So that's the example of our non-native, and the woodpeckers, which are our heroes. And I won't go into details of all the different parasitoid, non-native parasitoids that attack the different stages of EAB. But again, there's different roles of these different non-native biocontrols that help to control EAB at different life stage cycles. So very, very interesting work. And finally, the other is thinking through the genetic resistance of our native ash trees, because we are seeing what we are calling lingering ash, some trees that are able to defend itself or die or survive for quite a few years before it then succumbs to EAB, but it has some qualities that seem to be different from the other ash trees. So again, the idea behind the inventory and monitoring is even in those areas that we might have real severe devastation and a lot of ash trees that have died, we're going to be advocating to keep monitoring those stands and for this lingering ash that might be kind of utilized in some way with other genetic resistant trees, trying to keep it a native species, not combining with Manchurian ash or whatever, where try to keep it native where you're getting more the resistant ash and kind of take the qualities of those trees. So again, sometimes when you think about genetics and genetic things, it kind of brings a little bit of controversy, but I think in some cases we need to kind of think, well, how might it be helpful to us in keeping this tree in our environment? So some of the genetic research is, again, really showing, I think, some promise where, again, it's taken time. It literally takes, again, exposure to EAB and its response to EAB when you're doing this work. But trees, native tree species are showing through this work to be resistant to EAB, able to protect itself, able to live with EAB. It's been mostly done with green and white ash, where they have these trees that now can be in the same environment where EAB is. But we've got to get some work done on the black ash because it hasn't been done with black ash. So thinking through whether it's genetic work that might be done where you might be splicing and working with trees that might be showing some black ash resistance, or just looking at what seed that might be collected and then replanted, where you might have these plantings in areas where you've had this infestation, where you've reduced that level of the emerald ash borer, where you could replant and there'll be lesser densities of EAB, plus maybe the added benefit of your parasitoid that could protect these new seedlings that are growing up, that could then maybe have it be part of a forest that grows to a mature forest, and natural seed production is the idea behind this. So what are some of the next steps? At least for our state, I think it's still important for New York, because there's more than just emerald ash borer that could be in firewood that's transported around. But again, we still need to be really diligent about our outreach and education for us here in our state, and again, with the idea of slowing that rate of spread so that we have seed collection. We have forest management prescriptions that we can recommend to optimize conditions for ash trees to be persistent in their forest. So again, outreach and education is really important. And again, since we have EAB now in our state. We have to redirect some of our work to have education efforts that are directed towards people who live in our state, because we have a lot of folks that like to camp and fish and do things and bring firewood with them from their home. So thinking about more internal communications is really important, because with some of the research that I had done early on with my work, in some cases people knew about EAB, they knew the dangers of EAB, but they thought their firewood was still safe. And other kind of social dynamics were, boy, so you still need to have that outreach and education, because again, it's so hard to know that you actually have larvae in your firewood. You can't assume that it's safe to transport. So again, there's some work that's been done with the trade shows, the camping trade shows in the past this year and this year. This is just pictures from last year of work in terms of educating people that like to do outdoor recreation. And some of our guidebooks in terms of trying to get that outreach message out is still important. And again, for us here, a lot of folks still heat their homes with wood, and thinking through, where do you get your wood? Do you buy your wood locally for heating your homes? Knowing where your wood is coming from, your buyer and things of that nature is something that is more of a part of our outreach and education here in our state, at least. So other efforts that really need to start happening is just with inventory and monitoring of our ash trees. Again, getting it being more part of an awareness within the forest management community, foresters. We've had surveys now that have been conducted with log harvesters, forestry consultants, and others that kind of bring in this perspective of ash and what they could recommend, or talk to landowners that they might be working with their forest management plans. And also thinking through, because a lot of our forest landowners do not have management plans, they still can be involved in monitoring for the emerald ash borer, and thinking through the importance of ash trees. There's different ways that the public can be involved in terms of being aware of where ash trees grow, even if you don't own land, but you would want to become a volunteer working at a land trust or other groups to kind of inventory ash. We have ways to make that happen. So again, kind of thinking about ways of getting people interested. And also thinking through future seed collection efforts, again, with remembering that there's certain time periods where seed is available, so we need to be prepared. So seed collection efforts are now underway, and hopefully we'll have that going on in the years ahead. I still think there'd probably be opportunity for seed collection in New York in some places, even though you've had quite a bit of devastation in your area. There may be some lingering ash in some places where you might have ability to collect seed that seed hasn't been collected yet, which would be something I would recommend. And again, kind of bring more awareness for forest landowners in helping them make decisions on what they can do for ash preservation efforts. Again, one of the key things that we're starting to do are webinars and information sessions on the cultural importance of ash and some of the strategies that can be associated with protecting ash in lands that you might have. So that's a real key piece. And I just wanted to circle back to this picture. I think it actually showed up in the video. But again, this is something that I have in my wall in my office. This is a picture of Richard Syliboy back when they had just formed the Maine Indian Basket Makers Alliance back in the early 90s. And again, in terms of thinking about ash, the health of the ash, sustaining the cultural practices of basket making. There was a time where we still have dieback that occurs in brown ash, but again, Richard Syliboy was out in the field, longer hair then, but again, just his relationship to the ash tree, the concern about the health. This was before the Emerald Ash Borer, and he was out looking at ways about how can we protect the ash and the preservation of the of brown ash. I've just been so impressed and honored to actually be working with Richard, that with that long-term commitment. And I don't know how many meetings he's been to that and landowners he's visited with the idea of really kind of protecting ash and access to those lands for basket making. I'm impressed with the longevity and really the commitment that really is needed with this effort, because it's a long-term commitment that is going to be required as we think about protecting ash. And again, in terms of thinking about what we might do and how we might do it, in terms of protecting ash, the whole idea, right, is trying to sustain that cultural practice of basket making, the ability to find basket quality trees, how you process that tree, how you weave your baskets. It's really the doing of the practice that I like to refer to as Robin Kimmerer notes in her book, but it's the doing, right, that instills the meaning, reflects the cultural values, your identity. It's the doing that really encapsulates, right, you as a person, you as a, I don't know, as a community, right? So how can we keep that going? How do we keep the doing? And I think there's ways that we can kind of think through that, with these strategies to kind of sustain this as we move forward. The other thing that, looking back over the decade that I've been working here is just the relationships that have been formed and in terms of working together. And I love this quote that sometimes that Les will share, but it's so true. I mean, it's really such a really terrible thing, an impactful thing when we think about the Emerald Ash Borer. But in some ways, it really has brought us together in ways to try to find solutions. How can we learn from each other? What can we do together to address this? And it's so true with my work in the past decade. It's really helped build relations among tribal communities, because it's such an important species to so many tribal communities. And this is a picture of Richard and me on a land with the Nature Conservancy that they're managing and what they're considering for ash, and including access agreements, for collecting brown ash. And really, we kind of see this as being an important step in terms of thinking about a landscape scale response to the Emerald Ash Borer and protecting ash in our forests. We need to kind of think beyond maybe just tribal forest lands. A lot of our tribal ash harvesters rely on access to private land. So developing that relationship, one of the things that we learned early on in Michigan with the outbreaks of EAB was they had areas where they had ash that was fine for making baskets, but they could not get access to that ash. Private landowners were denying access. And so we've been really diligent in trying to build that relationship, and so we don't see some of the things that had happened in other places. And so that's part of our strategy, is that the development of that, which we're getting, I think, really strong support, I think, so that, which is good. And we've done some surveys to kind of to understand the awareness and maybe their interest in becoming involved. And this is really showing, again, because 95% of Maine is privately owned. Again, we are seeing some potential strong collaboration of private landowners. I think they want to really help try to keep ash on the landscape, not necessarily go to other species, kind of think through, even though it might cost them money with some of these strategies that, so there's willing partnerships that I think are being formed with, that we're seeing based on this landowner survey and the participation in some of our webinars that we've had this year. The first webinar we had, the Ash Protection Collaboration Across Wabanaki, We had over 300 webinar participants in some of our future work. So, and we've had pretty good attendance this year. So I'm very, very hopeful. And also just the growing kind of collaboration of efforts from, again, not only just tribal communities, but other higher education institutions, Vermont, federal agencies. There's more information sharing and outreach. And I didn't put in the slideshow, but just a month or so ago, there's a new, I can share this if there's interest, but it's managing northeastern forests threatened by the Emerald Ash Borer. And it's really kind of an outreach and education tool that was co-developed by, folks here, my students and myself, but we've got folks from the University of Vermont, University of Massachusetts, Seneca Nation, Harvard for. It's a broad range of people who helped collaborate in this outreach and education effort. Again, reaching out to landowners here in the Northeast about management strategies, and happy to share that with anyone that has an interest. But again, and importantly, we've got the cultural importance of why we need to keep ash in our forests that we really want to have as a component of this outreach and education effort. So I just wanted to recognize a few partners, but again, this list is definitely growing with the work that we're doing this past year. We've got the Wild Seed Project here in Maine. We've got other federal agencies who are interested now in working, state agencies, other tribal communities. We're looking to have more collaboration with the Canadian entities on our borders for collaboration work. So this is just a partial list that is kind of expanding that I hope will continue to grow as we work forward on this. This is my last slide, and I went for a long time, but just to illustrate, this is a slide that I actually took a picture of someone else's presentation, but I mean, just to show, again, black ash just is such an important species, and it just fulfills a lot. It just provides gifts in a lot of different ways. And part of the motivation, and I think part of the value system, I think part of the motivation for Richard, it's given so much to him. He feels like he needs to give back to the ash tree, and because it's given so much to us and for a lot of different things. And so I think there's a lot of effort and momentum, and I'm hoping that we can kind of continue that. So Willie Wan, thank you very much for listening to me tonight. And again, if you want to reach out for more information, or if you have questions, do not hesitate to reach out to me, and I'd be happy to hear from you. So thank you.
Thank you, John. That was absolutely wonderful. I really enjoyed that. I felt like I learned a lot, and I can really feel, your passion and your expertise shining when you talk about this. So I do have a question. It's one question, two parts, a little personal, but what about your work, really excites you or makes you happy, and what aspects of your work might be a challenge or be something that's harder?
Yeah, I think what excites me is, a transition that's kind of occurring where people working more together, researchers trying to understand the biology, finding for ways that, hey, if we do some of these actions, it might help sustain and keep this species as part of our forest landscape. And it's really been kind of a transition. And what I really like is the growing collaboration there seems to be, even though we're probably at a time where we've lost so much of our ash resource, but people are not giving up.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I find most hopeful. I think the most challenging right now, though, is for me, I guess personally, is just the legacy how can we kind of continue the work?
Mhm.
Because a lot of this is a long-term effort in terms of things that we need to do in the future, including seed collection, which is many, many years. We need to devote many years to collect the seed that we need when it's available. Trees grow at a certain rate, so there's things that take long-term commitment in terms of actions that we take and monitoring that we need to do. How the legacy effects, how do we pass baton, to kind of keep that going? Yeah, I think is one of those challenges, but again, when I see and worked with Richard, when he's been involved in this for decades and decades and decades, I see hope that way too. But again, you need some committed individuals, to kind of be the future leaders and keep that momentum going and actions going.
Mhm. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for your time. It was wonderful to get more of your story and hear the connection through your grandparents and now the work you're doing. And that was really beautiful. So thank you. I'm excited that we'll be able to circulate this recording, and I'm sure more conversations and questions will be asked after, the larger audience gets to see this and hear about this too. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Hannah.
Yep. Well, have a wonderful night. Thank you, everyone. And I'll look forward to sharing this out.
Bye-bye.